The day my children forgot my 58th birthday was the day I realized I had ceased to exist. For 3 decades, that day was a command performance I orchestrated for everyone else. The cake I baked, the dinner I cooked, the perfect gifts I hinted they should buy for me. But this year, there was only silence. The phone didn't ring, the doorbell was still. I was just a ghost in a house that was no longer a home, but a museum of a life that was over. I had given them my everything, and in the process, I had become nothing.
That piercing silence is a sound so many women know all too well. When the roles that defined us fall away, who are we? Welcome to Unbroken Women. I'm your host, Susan Bentley, and today we have the profound honor of hearing from Eleanor Vance of Portland. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that it is never, ever too late to find the seeds of a new life and make them bloom. This is her journey.
For 32 years, my world was a whirlwind of beautiful, necessary chaos. Mornings were a symphony of lunch boxes snapping shut, frantic searches for missing soccer cleats, and last-minute homework help over burnt toast. My husband, Robert, was always the steady provider, leaving early and coming home late, leaving the domestic sphere entirely in my hands. I didn't mind. I thrived on it. I was the CEO of our family. I was the scheduler, the chef, the nurse, the tutor, the confidant. My calendar wasn't my own. It was a patchwork of parent-teacher conferences, dental appointments, and music recitals. I measured my success in the hype of my children, Sarah and Michael. Their achievements were my achievements. Their happiness was my purpose. I genuinely believed that this was the highest calling a woman could have. I remember friends talking about their careers or hobbies, and I'd feel a quiet sense of superiority. My work was more important, more vital. I was building human beings. What could possibly matter more? The house was always full, always loud, always needing me, and I loved it. I thought that feeling of being needed was the same as being loved, the same as having an identity. I had no idea it was a borrowed one. But underneath the hum of activity, there was a weight. It was the constant, unspoken pressure to be perfect. The perfect mother, the supportive wife. My needs were always the last on the list. So far down they eventually fell off the page entirely. I remember once I wanted to take a pottery class. It was just a silly little thing, but the logistics felt monumental. Who would make dinner? Who would help with homework? Robert called it a frivolous distraction. So I let it go. I let a lot of things go. Little pieces of myself chipped away over the years in the name of service to my family. The weight wasn't resentment. Not then. It was more like a slow, creeping fog. A sense of performing a role so completely that the person playing the part had vanished. I'd look in the mirror some mornings and see a tired, functional stranger looking back. She was efficient. She was capable. But I couldn't remember the last time she had laughed just for herself. The first whisper came after Michael, my youngest, left for college. I had spent the entire summer helping him pack, buying dorm supplies, having all the big talks. The day we drove away from his dorm, leaving him standing on the curb, waving, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Mission complete. But when we got home, the silence was deafening. It wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. It echoed in the empty hallways and clung to the furniture. I walked into Michael's pristine room, and for the first time, a thought flickered through my mind, uninvited and terrifying. What now? I pushed it down immediately, busying myself with laundry, organizing spice racks, cleaning things that were already clean. But the thought kept coming back in quiet moments. I'd be watering my hand plants, the only things that still needed me daily, and I'd find myself staring out the window, imagining a different life. A life where I was just Eleanor. Not Mom, not Robert's wife, just me. I didn't even know who that person was anymore, and the not knowing felt like a chasm opening up right under my feet. Then came my birthday. It was a Tuesday in October. For weeks leading up to it, I'd done what I always did, drop hints. I'd mention a new book I wanted, a restaurant I'd heard about. It was a game we played. I'd lay the groundwork, and they would follow through, making me feel seen and celebrated. But this year, the hints fell into a void. I woke up that morning to an empty house. Robert had left a scribbled note about a meeting, no mention of the day. I waited. I told myself the kids were busy. They'd call later. I busied myself baking my own favorite cake, a lemon chiffon, out of sheer defiant habit. Mid-afternoon, I called Sarah. She was stressed about a work deadline. We talked for 10 minutes about her boss, her project, her boyfriend. She never mentioned it. I didn't have the heart or the courage to remind her. Later, I texted Michael. He replied hours later with a one-word answer about a class. That was it. The sun set. I sat at the kitchen table with an entire untouched cake in front of me. The silence in the house wasn't just quiet anymore. It was an accusation. It told me that my role as the family's center of gravity, the one who remembered everything, was a job. And now that my primary duties were over, I had been decommissioned. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a function. And I was no longer functional. My first reaction was shame. I felt pathetic. What kind of person falls apart because no one remembered their birthday? I told myself I was being dramatic, that they were busy with their own important lives, that this was the success I had worked for, to raise independent children. The next morning, I threw the cake away and pretended the day had never happened. I doubled down on my routines, cleaning with a manic intensity, scrubbing floors as if I could scrub the hollowness out of my own chest. The fear was immense. If I wasn't Mom, the all-knowing, ever-present matriarch, then who was I? The question was a black hole. To even consider it felt like a betrayal of my entire life's work. What would Robert think if I suddenly started having needs of my own? Our whole marriage was built on a foundation of his career and my support. To change that felt like setting off a bomb in the middle of our quiet, orderly life. I was terrified of his dismissal, of my mother's judgment, of my friends thinking I was having some sort of midlife crisis. So I tried to ignore it. I tried to just be quiet, to fold myself up smaller and smaller, to take up less space, to want for nothing. But the emptiness was a hunger, and it was starting to eat me alive. The breaking point came a few weeks later on a Sunday. I was feeling particularly adrift and called Sarah just to hear her voice. I suggested, very casually, that maybe I could drive down to visit her for a weekend. Her response was immediate, impatient. "Oh, Mom, I'm so swamped right now. That feels a little smothering, don't you think? I need my space." Smothering. The word hit me like a physical blow. All those years of all-encompassing love, of constant care, of being her everything, all of it was now redefined as smothering. I mumbled something about understanding and hung up the phone. I stood in the silent kitchen, clutching the receiver, and a sound came out of me that I didn't recognize. It was a sob, but it felt like it was being ripped from the deepest part of my soul. I slid down the kitchen cabinets until I was a heap on the cold linoleum floor. I wept. I wept for the little girl who wanted to be a botanist, for the young woman who shelved her own dreams, and for the middle-aged woman who was now utterly, completely redundant. My children didn't need me anymore. And without them needing me, I had no reason to be. In that moment, on the floor, I knew something had to die. Either me or the life I was living. Lying there, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in 40 years. A dream I'd had as a girl, long before I met Robert. I had wanted to be a master gardener, to work with plants, to understand the science and art of cultivation. I had volumes of botanical drawings I'd made as a teenager, hidden away in a box in the attic. The dream felt like it belonged to another person, a ghost of a girl, full of passion. As I picked myself up off the floor, a decision formed in my mind. It was quiet, but it was steel. I was going to do it. I was going to pursue that dream. I was going to learn how to cultivate a garden. It felt insane. It felt selfish. It felt like the most terrifying and rebellious act of my life. I knew Robert would mock it. I knew my mother would call it a silly indulgence. But for the first time in my adult life, their opinions felt secondary to the tiny flickering flame of hope that had just ignited inside me. The next day, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I looked up the local community college and found it, an intensive horticulture certificate program. The application was online. My heart pounded in my ears as I filled it out, my fingers hovering over the submit button for a full 10 minutes. This was real. This was a commitment. Taking a deep breath, I clicked it. A wave of nausea and exhilaration washed over me. I had done something entirely for myself. A week later, I got the acceptance email. My first class was on a Monday night. I walked into a classroom filled with people in their 20s and 30s. I was old enough to be their mother, in some cases their grandmother. I felt like a fraud, an antique placed in a modern art exhibit. I sat in the back, clutching my new notebook, feeling utterly invisible and overwhelmingly conspicuous all at once. The professor started talking about soil composition and Latin plant names. And for a moment, I thought, what have I done? But then he put up a slide of a weeping cherry tree in full bloom, and I felt a forgotten part of my soul just sigh. It felt like coming home. Telling my family was harder than the application. Robert was dismissive, as I expected. He glanced up from his newspaper when I told him, "Horticulture? Isn't that just expensive gardening? What are you gonna do, Ellie? Start selling petunias on the corner?" He laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was a laugh designed to put me back in my box. It stung deeply. But my mother's reaction was worse. I called her, excited to share my news, and was met with a cold silence. Then she said, "Eleanor, for heaven's sake, your children are grown, but you're still a wife. Robert needs a proper dinner, a well-kept home. This is a selfish, frivolous pursuit. It's not your place." The words selfish and not your place echoed in my head for days. They were the very things I feared most. I was neglecting my duties. I was abandoning my post. Every time I left for class, I felt a pang of guilt, as if I were a teenager sneaking out of the house. Robert started making pointed comments about the costs of my textbooks or the mess from my soil samples on the back porch.
It was a constant barrage of subtle and not so subtle disapproval, designed to make me feel foolish and to pressure me into giving up.
The external resistance was fuel for my own inner war. My mind was a battlefield. One voice, the one that sounded a lot like my mother, screamed that I was too old for this. My brain wasn't as sharp as the younger students. The Latin names wouldn't stick. I was making a fool of myself. Then another voice, a quieter one, would whisper about the joy I felt when I successfully identified a plant pest or perfectly pruned a rose bush. Some nights I'd lie awake, convinced I had made a terrible mistake, that I should just apologize to Robert, drop the classes, and go back to being the quiet, compliant woman he married. The familiar pain of my old life seemed almost comfortable compared to the terrifying uncertainty of this new path. The loneliness was crushing. I was in a new world where I didn't belong, and I was actively being pushed out of the old one. I felt completely and utterly adrift, caught in a current of my own making. The near defeat came during midterms. We had a massive exam on plant pathology, 100 questions on fungi, bacteria, and viruses that I had spent weeks studying for. I walked into the exam feeling cautiously optimistic, but as I read the questions, my mind went blank. The names, the treatments, the symptoms, it was all a jumbled mess. Panic set in, cold and absolute. I felt the condescending smirks of Robert and my mother in my mind. I could hear them saying, "We told you so." I stumbled through the exam and walked out knowing I had failed. When I got the results back, 48%, it felt like a final verdict on my life. I wasn't a gardener. I was a foolish old woman playing dress-up. That night, I sat in my car in the college parking lot for over an hour. The graded test crumpled in my fist. I decided I would go home, log on to the school website, and officially withdraw. The fight was over. I had lost. I was just a mother, and that was all I was ever meant to be. As I was about to turn the key in the ignition, there was a tap on my window. It was a young woman from my class named Chloe. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. She had seen my face when the grades were posted. "That test was brutal," she said, her voice kind. "I barely passed." She pointed to the crumpled paper in my hand. "But, she continued, "in the practical lab, you're the best one in the class. The way you handle the plants, you have a gift for it. The book stuff is hard, but the real stuff, you've got it." She then asked if I wanted to form a study group for the final. It was such a small gesture. But in that moment, it was everything. Someone saw me. Not as a failed mother or a foolish old woman, but as a student with a talent, a peer. That simple act of kindness, of recognition, was the spark. It didn't solve everything, but it stopped me from turning the key. It stopped me from giving up. That was the beginning of the climb. I started studying with Chloe and a few others. They respected my practical knowledge, and they helped me with the memorization. I wasn't just an old woman in the back of the class anymore. I was part of a team. I started volunteering at the local botanical garden on weekends. At first, I just pulled weeds, but soon they had me helping with the fragile orchids in the greenhouse. I spent hours there, surrounded by life and growth, and I felt my own spirit starting to unfurl. I learned to set boundaries at home. When Robert made a sarcastic comment, instead of shrinking, I would calmly say, "This is important to me." He was shocked into silence.
I started to build a small garden in our neglected backyard, turning a patch of weeds into a thriving bed of perennials. With every weed I pulled, it felt like I was clearing out the debris in my own soul. It was slow, hard work, but for the first time, it was my work. Mine. My final project for the program was to create a complete landscape design for a therapeutic garden at a local nursing home. I poured my heart into it. On the day of the presentation, I stood before my professors and classmates, not as a timid housewife, but as a knowledgeable horticulturalist. I spoke with a confidence that stunned even myself. I didn't just talk about plants. I talked about how a garden could heal, how it could provide solace and purpose. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then it broke into applause. I had passed with honors. But the real victory wasn't the certificate. It was the woman who had earned it. I was no longer a ghost in my own home. I was Eleanor, and Eleanor was a gardener. If I could speak to that woman crying on the kitchen floor, I would tell her this: you are not invisible. You are dormant. Your life is not over. A new season is waiting to begin. Motherhood is a part of your garden, a beautiful and vital part, but it is not the entire landscape. Your own spirit needs tending. It needs sun, and it needs soil, and it needs the courage to break new ground. It's terrifying, I know, but your spirit needs its own garden to bloom, and it will be more beautiful than you can ever imagine.
Thank you, Eleanor, for sharing your incredible story of renewal. What a powerful reminder that our purpose can be cultivated at any stage of life. If Eleanor's journey resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters here. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Unbroken Women, and click here to watch another story of a spirit who refused to be broken. Until next time, be well.